Psalm 77, and I will be reading this morning from the Message translation, the Message Bible translation, verses 1 through 12, Psalm 77, 1 through 12. And it reads, I yell out to my God. I yell with all of my might. I yell at the top of my lungs. God listens. I found myself in trouble and went looking for my God. My life was an open wound that would not heal. When friends said everything would turn out all right, I did not believe a word they said. I remember God and shake my head. I bow my head, then wring my hands. I'm awake all night, not a wink of sleep. I can't even say what is bothering me. I go over the days one by one. I ponder the years gone by. I strum my lute all through the night, wondering how to get my life together. Somebody say, get my life together. Wondering how to get my life together. Will the Holy One walk off and leave us for good? Will God never smile again? Is God's love worn threadbare? Has her salvation promise burned out? Has God forgotten their manners? Has she angrily stumped off and left us just my luck? I said, the high God retires just the moment I need her. But I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate on all your work and muse on your mighty deeds. The word of the psalmist for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Beloved, hope is a practice. Say that with me. Hope is a practice. Say it again like you mean it. Hope is a practice. Hope is a practice. It's like anything else that you desire to become very good at. You practice it. You practice the piano if you want to be good at the piano. You practice dribbling if you want to be good at the game of basketball. You practice writing if you want to be a writer. Hope is a practice. I remember sitting at my piano for hours at a time when I was a kid, practicing, and it started off with my mother making me practice. She said, I didn't pay too much money now for you to go to this recital and be embarrassing us because you did not practice. You better sit down here and practice. And so I'd be practicing for hours and hours so that I would not embarrass my parents at my piano recital. And my father is a pianist, so there was added pressure. Don't be making us look bad out here. I sat down and I practiced. And after a while, I started practicing on my own because I enjoyed it. But also, I was beginning to see the fruits of the labor of that practice. And even into adulthood, I was practicing for hours. I wanted to get under my fingers what I needed to get under my fingers. And yes, there are certain talents that have been gifted to us. Yes, some things are innate to us on some level, but what has been gifted can be lost without practice. What has been gifted, whether it's a talent like singing or whether it's a divine anointing, whatever has been gifted can be lost without practice. Psychologist Anders Ericsson studied the abilities of top performers in their fields and came to the conclusion that it takes around 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert. Now, that is whether you're becoming an expert of philosophy, a scholar of philosophy, or maybe, Cheryl, you're becoming a top legal person, a top lawyer, you're becoming a cello player, you're becoming a scientist. It takes practice. Even the masters of a craft practice. The practice does not stop once you get to the top of your field. Even the top NBA players are running shooting drills. Even the top surgeons continue to work on their sutures, continue to study new methods of operating on people. How is it then? How is it that we view all of these things as something you practice, but we view hope as something you just have? We view all of this stuff, and you got to sit down and practice. Don't be embarrassing yourself. But we view hope and we view faith as something we just have, perhaps. That is one of the problems with many Christianities today. Folks think you can just give your life to Christ one time. You can just get Baptist one time, and you never have to work toward anything ever again because Jesus saved and Jesus paid it all. That what we are doing is not actually practice, but we're relying on one-time professions to craft our faith. But your profession of faith, your baptism, is only the beginning of the work. There's so much focus these days on what one should believe and not enough practice happening. Many folks yelling about God, but very few folks are practice being about God. There's a disconnect between what we call orthopraxy and orthodoxy. So much focus on the belief, but not enough practice happening, not enough doing what the carpenter told us to do, and we find ourselves caught in the dens of despair, wanting our religious identities to offer a quick fix or a quick remedy for our troubling situations. Today's psalmist finds himself in the den of despair. He pens this text full of a roller coaster of emotions. Have you ever had a roller coaster of emotions? One moment you're smiling about something, the next moment grief hits you out of nowhere and you're weeping. This psalmist is penning something that has a roller coaster of emotions, vacillating between uncertainty and hope for triumph. The psalm is attributed to a man named Asaph, a composer and a leader who wrote alongside David. Now, some might even consider him to be a protege of David's. Now, why does this matter? Because the practice of psalm writing was not new. It had already been established by this point. This is, after all, Psalm number 77, which means that there were 76 at least before this one, 77 of 150 that made the canon. And while we do not know the exact order in which the Psalms were written, we can figure that there is a culture. There is a culture associated with this genre that has shaped the way the writer moves about his thoughts. Psalm writing ain't new. Psalm 77, it captures so many complicated feelings. From raw anger to disgust, from hopelessness to disappointment, from panic to pride, and everything in between, a collection of descriptions of sleepless nights to ponderings on the existence of God. And in a climactic moment of cathartic release, Asaph inquires, has God retired in my moment of despair? Has God retired? How many of y'all retired out there? Has God turned in God's 2-week notice? How many of y'all resigned from something out there? Has God resigned in my moment of greatest need? Many of us find ourselves asking similar questions of the divine in this hour. Our restless nights doom scrolling on the internet turn into weary mornings as we wander to the coffee pot for a glimpse of salvation. I know I've been there this morning, wandering to the coffee pot, hoping that it will save us. Has God retired in our moment of desperation? Has her promises burned out? Has she angrily stumped off and left us disgusted with the ways that we have harmed each other, disgusted with the ways that we have neglected each other, disgusted with with the ways that we have condemned each other? Has God retired? Many prophets ask similar questions throughout our text. I'm reminded of Habakkuk, who famously cries out to God, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Have you retired?" is what he is asking. Even David in Psalm 22 says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" God, have you retired? Have you resigned? Have you turned in your 2 weeks notice? Have you retired, God? It is not an out-of-the-box question. We're experiencing a national affordable housing crisis in every major city in America. Has God retired? Youth suicide rates are climbing while social services are declining. Has God retired? On more personal notes, the chemo ain't chemoing, and the money ain't moneying, and life is lifing, and grief is griefing. It has been a vicious cycle of one thing after another, one catastrophe after another, and we cry out to God, "God, where are you? Have you left us? Have you forgotten about us? Have you put in your resignation on your people?" I saw something posted one day on Twitter. I refuse to call it by its new name. I saw something posted on Twitter. The person said, "I am tired of living in unprecedented times." Oh, I felt that thing in my bones, in my shando, as they say. I'm tired of living in unprecedented times. As someone who has lived through, the Oklahoma City bombing where my next door neighbor's daughter was killed, the Columbine High School shooting, September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, Virginia Tech, all before the age of 18, I felt that deep in my soul. I am tired, God, of living in unprecedented times. I'm tired of turning on the news and seeing another young person has been murdered. God, I'm tired of seeing people having to beg for basic resources. God, have you retired? Have you retired? It is no wonder why many people have lost confidence in religious institutions. Because instead of dealing with the pain and the suffering, the lamentation around the fact that our living conditions are not sufficient, we are doing things like condemning worshiping the ancestors, and condemning spraying sage around your house, and condemning homosexuality, and the list goes on and on and on, in the midst of violence, in the midst of persecution, in the midst of genocide, and we are crying out to these people, have you retired, God? And all they're doing to not answer our question is put up barriers in the way of us getting in right relationship with the divine. It is no wonder why many people have leaned into nihilistic dispositions. How can one justify believing in a God that could allow for such devastation? And I imagine that the psalmist knew something, a little bit of something, about the cycles of devastation. Asaph, born of a people who found themselves in and out of imperial captivity. I love the way Will Gaffney puts it, a Hebrew Bible scholar. She sees the psalmist as a survivor of battle, or perhaps a survivor's widow, grieving, inconsolable by friends and family, full of anguish and anxiety, and the writer recognizes the precarious position their nation is in, and writes a lament of his people. Asaph is writing the lament of his people. That means that lamentation was communal. We don't do a lot of lamentation in this world. It took us over a year for there to even be a service of lamentation in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. We don't do lamentation well. And although Asaph is using I statements, that was a common practice, what Asaph is really saying is, God, we want to know where you are. God, we are confused about whether or not you have resigned from us. This should let us know that nobody is suffering alone, and nobody in our community should suffer alone. Amen. That our joy is your joy, your grief is my grief, and your lamentation is all of our lamentations. But whether communal or personal, I assume that many of us have been to the depths of despair that are expressed in this psalm. I know some of you have wondered, like I wonder, are we ever going to get out of this mess we're in? Where is the hope? Is there any hope at all? God, have you retired? And you are not alone in your wonderings. This is a communal resignation. But, somebody say but. There's always a but. But, I heard somebody once say that hope is a practice. That the only way out of this cycle, the only way through this cycle of devastation is to practice hope. It is a practice. It is not a solution. It is not something that is just going to fall from the sky. No one is coming to save us. It is not something that is just going to show up. It is a practice, a repeated exercise, or a performance of an activity so as to acquire or maintain proficiency in it. It is something that we constantly have to nurture, both in times of trouble and in times of celebration. You know, it's really hard, because we love to call on the name of the Lord when things are going terribly. And then when stuff starts to turn around in our lives and it starts to going good, some of us fall out of practice. We fall out of practice, but it should be practice whether times are good or times are bad. That in the midst of celebration, we should still be calling on the name of the Lord as practice. We should still be recounting the deeds of God as practice. I love to tell people that the practice meets us where passion fails us. I know many of us are passionate about whatever it is we're passionate about, justice or art, or creativity, whatever it is, right? Singing. Many of us are passionate, but there are some moments, some mornings where you wake up and you roll to the side of the bed and you just ain't got it. You just ain't got it that day, and this is where practice meets us. When the passion is not there, we still have a solid practice to rely on. The psalmist is writing ferociously as a practice of hope. Like every artist and every poet, like every songwriter and every filmmaker, the psalmist is writing not just for fun, not just because he's passionate, but because there is something deep within him that has the audacity to believe that life is possible in the valley of dry bones, that God can still work miracles in the morgue, that after assassination there can still be resurrection, and part of his practice is to recall the memories of our God, our help in ages past. Yes, the psalm starts off as a psalm of lamentation, but you'll see at verse 10, it takes a turn. It takes a turn toward the practice of remembering, a turn toward the possibility of hope. Asaph writes, I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old. And he starts to slowly put pen to paper the stories of redemption and the stories of vindication that he had been taught by his mama in them, by his grandpappy, by his aunts, and by his uncles. He starts to put on paper, in the midst of his lamentation, he is practicing hope by putting on paper the memories of God. The way that God showed up for his ancestors, the way that God continued to show up for his people in and out of captivity, with the hope that perhaps if he writes it down, that God will hear it, God will see it, God will know it, and if God did it before, God could surely do it again. He writes as he remembers the Exodus, and that is to say that, God, I'm in despair right now, and I know nothing seems to be working in my favor, and I know the cards seem to be stacked against me, but I still have expectations of you, God, because I have had experiences with you. I still have expectations of you, God, because my grandparents and my great-grandparents had experiences of you, that I am reminded in the practice of writing your deeds, I am reminded of your redemptive power, and that you are still able to do just what you said you would do, a mighty work in our lives. And so we gather in these spaces week by week, or however often you need to come and practice hope. We gather because we are bonding over the collective memory of God showing up for us just in the nick of time. Or as the people that I grew up used to say, he may not come when you want him, but he'll be there right on time. We bond around that memory in times of trials and tribulation, and in seasons of chaos and calamity. And the only thing that keeps us sometimes in the midnight hour, the only things holding us together, is the hope that God will be on time. God's time, not ours. And so we sing songs together like, "Did my Lord deliver Daniel?" As a remembering tool, as a tool of practicing hope. Did my God hear the groans of our people in misery, in captivity? Did my God use Moses to part the Red Sea? Did my God draw water from a rock in a time of drought? Did my God rain fried chicken and croissants from the sky when my ancestors were starving? Oh, that's not in the Bible. It's quail and manna, but in my mind it's fried chicken and croissants. And I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord, and I will remember your wonders of old. That is our practice. The practice of remembering, of stringing the wondrous acts of God, the theophany of God together. It is a practice of hope. This is why we gather, and this is why we remember, not just to lean into nostalgia and reminisce on the good old days. You know, back in the day we used to sing this song, and back in the day we used to say this. No, we remember as a practice of hope. We remember as a call for a new revolution. We remember that all the times God made a way when we least expected means that God can and God still will. We recall the small yet monumental victories. We remember God, and God remembers us. God's presence remembers us as we fight to put the pieces of our hope back together. Friends, times are hard, and I can't lie to you. I'm not going to make any promises that they're not going to get harder. Okay? I'm not in the business of selling fantasy. Times are hard, but I dare you to practice hope and remember God. The work of justice is never ending, but I dare you to practice hope and remember God. The call to disrupt status quos and to abolish carceral systems cannot be solved by a cheap hope. It has to be solved with a daily investment kind of hope. So I dare you to practice that hope with every fiber of your being and remember God. In the midst of anguish and despair, I dare you to remember that the Lord is our light and salvation. In the face of turmoil and uncertainty, I dare you to remember that God is our refuge and strength, a present help in times of trouble. In an era where so many have lost confidence in the government and confidence in their family and confidence in faith, I dare you to remain confident that you will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Amen. I dare you to remember God for the sake of life and for the sake of liberation and for the sake of cultivating a never-ending hope. And so the question is, has God retired? No. I would argue no. I would argue that humans be humaning. Humans be humaning. We do some things that are devastating to each other and to our environments and to our ecological system, but God has not retired. I love the way the Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes put it a few weeks ago. I saw him preach, and he said, listen, he said, life be lifing and humans be humaning, but God be Godden. Okay? I see Ebonics. Some of y'all don't like Ebonics. That's okay. God is still God. In the midst of all the ways that we act foolishly, in the midst of all the ways that people and institutions have failed us, God is still God. Our strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Will you rise with me in body or spirit? The song says, you are my strength, strength like no other. You are my hope, and you are my peace, and you are my joy. In the midst of despair, I want you to sing this over yourself. As you go through your summers, whether you are present